Hello, Grace Point Church. I miss story time. Do any of you miss story time? Remember when you were in school and you just get to sit around a teacher and they just read you a story? Um, I love that. How come we don't do that for adults? Stories are wonderful. Some of the things I love about stories is that every story is unique. Every story has different details. Every story is adventurous. You don't know what to expect because everyone's story is different from the other people's stories. And so I love that. There's always that sense of what's going to happen when you're hearing a story. The other thing that I love about stories is that actually all the good stories kind of relate to one another. I learned about this in college when I was studying English, but they talk about all the good stories have like a similar approach, a similar construction, right? Every good story begins with you've got the initial setting, right? You've got your characters, you've got your place, you've got the time of what's happening in the story, you've got the mood, right? So every story begins with an initial setting, and then eventually, in the good stories, something arises like a tension or a problem. And as you're reading through the story, it begins to escalate, usually into like an explosion or a crisis or a tragedy. And it gets to this point where you're like, what's going to happen? Is there any way that this can be solved? And then you have resolution, which is usually like a question is asked or a battle happens or there's an important dialogue or a character changes their ways and you've got your resolution and then that leads to a new setting and on it goes. And so you can have that happen numerous times. You could have numerous plot lines within a story happening at the same time. It's phenomenal. Scripture actually does this. Some people have looked at the entire scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, showing how it's actually one big story of God, about what God does to save his people. You've got the fall. First, you got creation. No, I guess that's the first part. You've got the setting of creation, and then you've got the fall. That's the problem. And then what's the solution going to be? It's going to be a redeemer. A redeemer's coming. Jesus comes. That becomes a solution. And then ultimately, we look forward to the consummation of where all of the themes are picked up in the new heaven and the new earth in the future and Revelation, all of that. So, Scripture itself is one big, beautiful story. I think it's the best story ever. I think all other good stories are good because they pick up themes that the gospel story has. Um, the other thing about scripture is that there's lots of tiny stories within the big story, and so on Sunday we're going to be hearing a story. Before we hear from some other member attenders of our church, we're going to have a few baptisms. They're going to share their story of redemption. That's going to be wonderful. I look forward to that. Um, but we've also got a story that almost no one knows about. It's Second Chronicles chapter 33. It's the story of Manasseh. He is a horrible dude, and we're going to go over it, and it's a beautiful story. It's only one chapter, Second Chronicles 33. I'd love for you to just try to read through that and ask yourself this question when you're reading this story. Ask yourself, what other famous story does Manasseh's story remind me of? As I've been walking through this passage, it's reminded me of a few other stories in Scripture and otherwise. But there's something so beautiful here um, and I don't know that a lot of people have made the connections. So it'd be a fun way to just engage with the text before you come on Sunday. A good way of preparing your heart for worship and for hearing the word of the Lord. Read Second Chronicles 33. Read about Manasseh and ask yourself, what story does this remind me of? Is there any other stories that are similar to this? And doing that will be the perfect way for you to prepare for Sunday. And then we're going to hear a few other stories of people within our congregation. And then we're going to do a baptism, and it's going to be so, so fun. So I look forward to seeing you on Sunday.